Welcome, everyone. My name is Angela Damiani, and today we are going to talk about pushing the boundaries on your brand, how to make a spectacle with it. Before we jump in, a little bit more about who Lean and I represent. We work at a firm called Milwaukee, and we're an engagement agency that works with organizations and companies to design and build new and transformational experiences. So as you can imagine, we have some opinions as it relates to creating spectacle. And we do that through marketing strategy, engagement consulting, experience design, and production. If any of you would like to talk to us after this about ways in which we might make spectacle with your brand, always happy to have that conversation. But today is going to be a little bit about what we've seen in this space, how things have changed in the last couple of years, and then also like where we'd like to take things moving forward. I think being experienced designers, we've seen a lot and we're excited to share this with you. I'll just share a little bit about me and I'll toss it over to Lena. I am the CEO of Milwaukee, have been with the organization since the beginning for 15 years. We'll be celebrating in February. And I am particularly excited to talk about this. Lena will probably admit to us that I have been beating the drum about a spectacle, really for the last year and a half. And I think it's actually like a reaction to how muted our lives got with COVID. And now that things are open back up, I have this like urge to have more tactile, like sensory experiences. And so that's one of the reasons I'm excited to have this conversation today. Lena, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. My name is Lena. I have been with Milwaukee for the last 2 years doing experience design and event planning, but I actually bring a background of theatrical design, so set carpentry, scenic painting, and then live events production for music, so lighting and sound and all of that. So I'm very passionate about the bigger the better, the more whimsical the better, anything that's like installation based and artistic like that. So very excited to not only be here at Milwaukee, but talk with you all today because this is just exactly what I love to gush about. So I'm ready to jump in.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think maybe we should just have a little bit of like level setting here about what we mean by spectacle and why this is important. One of the main reasons I think this is an important topic is just the inundation we have around information and the ways in which we live in this like multimodal communication reality. The fact of the matter is each of us have to manage multiple different platforms and everyone's eyeballs are scattered. I mean, really, I always sort of laugh when we spend a lot of time creating beautiful and amazing content calendars for our clients, not knocking our creative services team, even in the slightest, but the amount of consternation that goes into the nitpickety placement of words and the way in which the graphics look, knowing that we're going to get maybe half a second of a swipe of an eyeball on that space is just the reality that we live in, right? And in order to sort of cut through the noise, I have this deep sense that like while AI and content generation has become easier and there's a huge proliferation of that, everyone is sort of like zigging in that direction. The brands that are going to stand out, the ones that'll sort of win for mind share, and then obviously the ability to sell your products or find people to come work for your brands, are those that are going to be creating a little bit more dynamic, something that's really emotionally captivating, visually appealing, something that's grand and impressive. And we'll talk a little bit about this. Sometimes that means scale, but sometimes that also means like the VIP nature of things, your attention to detail. And really where I think about the word spectacle, I think about unexpected elements that evoke awe and excitement. And that last bit is, I think, the most important because I don't know about you, but I feel numb. Like I feel numb by the amount of information I have to consume, by the fact that we live in this dual virtual and real reality. And the more we can evoke emotion and that sense of awe, the more people are going to feel attracted to something, the more they're going to actually want to engage with you, the more attachment they're going to have to your brand. And then when you do have beautifully well-crafted content calendars, they'll be more likely to actually interact with it. And so to create spectacle, I think we have to imagine what something could be and not just what it is, right? We have to spend a little time actually sort of evoking what that might look like. And, the thing is, when we're talking about spectacular events, we're talking about creating memories. And I love to start in that perspective because it's so easy to get lost to the minutia, right? Like the venue, the F&B order, what we're going to do for registration, and to not take a moment and think about what are the sensations we want people to feel, because that's going to be what they latch on to. That's going to be what creates the lasting memory and the real emotional attachment. And so I think uh, actually, and I would also say, those are the things that are going to really augment what happens with your online experience, right? Like, how can you create something that creates true and meaningful, engaging content? And this, again, is a solution. I'll say a solution, perhaps not the only solution, but a solution to the dilemma of this sort of like event saturation, just information saturation. The fact of the matter is, people more than ever love to sign up for things and not show up, love to subscribe and not actually open your emails and read them, right? I mean, you sort of live in this like FOMO reality. But if you're giving someone something that they're actually going to be attached to, their likelihood to interact with it is going to be a lot higher. So how do you do this? How do we get to this point, right? I think the first thing you do is ask yourself, what do you want your brand to really stand for? You know what I mean? What are your actual values? What are those sensations you want people to really feel when they interact with you? Lena?
Yeah. So now that we've kind of defined spectacle a little bit, if we're going to start thinking about how to create that and understanding our brand's core values and mission statement and really what our goalposts are for this, I immediately jump into thinking about how to do usual things in an unusual way. So whatever people are used to seeing from you, how can you just pick one or two impactful, inspiring ways to just do it a little bit differently? And I think this not only sparks creativity on the team you're planning with and also just your internal culture, but it also breeds innovation because people are going to think about doing things differently and they're going to be maybe a little bit more confident to let out their crazy ideas, which is, I think, for the betterment of everyone. So I have some examples on this slide here, but when we talk about considering unexpected elements, I think about like instead of just having one disco ball, like if you had like 24 of them strung at different heights and you had different lights projected on them, like this is actually something that's pretty simple to put together. But then imagine seeing this, it's like you feel like you're inside of a whole universe. And it's also a nice photo opportunity, which I feel like everybody loves these days because we're fighting for attention on everyone's feeds too. And when I think about, like I had mentioned, doing usual things in an unusual way, I think about what can be clunky at an event. So in terms of doing something differently, like how do we do seating differently? How do we make seating more exciting? How do we make the check-in table more exciting? And something that has encouraged my creativity a little bit recently is this picture on the side here of like, instead of just having folding chairs, maybe like installing these fun, playful hammocks for like adults and kids to sit in, or aiming for a wow factor. So you see on the other side there's like this inner tube installation, which I think is interesting and again creates that like spectacle awe feature because it makes this beautiful pattern on the ground, but it also creates shade, which is something that is like a practical need for every event. So just thinking about how to do that just a little bit differently, and then it creates this like amazing effect. So these are just small things to kind of start your brain thinking of this process of like, how do we accomplish this? But yeah, these are some things that have been inspiring us lately.
Absolutely. What, I'm sorry, did I not go the right way? Here we go. Going forward, not backward here. All right, so venturing beyond your comfort zone. I think a lot of times this isn't really like the fault of us as marketers. It's easy to sort of like feel like we need incremental growth, right? We're just sort of looking to like maybe grow by 10% in certain ways. And so why not why break something that like isn't totally broken, right? Or try to fix it. I think the fact of the matter is we have a unique opportunity in this moment to design experiences that really do sort of cause that sense of awe, as I was saying, and actually do lead to growth. I just don't think that great brands stay in their comfort zone. They push the boundaries by taking actual risks and adapting and evolving to other trends. And I'm thinking about a couple of different examples of things we've seen here locally. So we work with North Shore Bank, which is a community bank That's really in the middle, right? In terms of its size and scale. It's not one that like, sponsors the big national sports leagues and things like that, but they really want to do community engagement in a new way. And they want to show up in places that people might not be expecting them. And so we spent a lot of time helping them design something called Southside Dining Week, which is a whole series of events that take place in the fall to really light up over 20 different neighborhoods on Milwaukee's South Side and highlight the small businesses that exist there. Something like this, I think, allows for a number of different things to happen. One is it puts their brand front and center because they're creating it. They're not just sponsoring it, they're actually building this cultural experience from the ground up. The other thing it allows them to do is create really unique partnerships with obviously the neighborhood organizations, the businesses that are involved, so the restaurants, breweries, et cetera, but also um, uh, you know, the tourism department, folks that like a bank wouldn't necessarily be interacting with that are helping to sort of like get their name out there and really extol like the virtue of this amazing experience that allows people to explore really their own city in a way that they perhaps haven't actually been able to in the past. And every single element of this, from the like kickoff to the tastings to the tours that take place, and then obviously the people actually going to dine, helps sort of like reimagine what their brand really is, right? Like, how do we bring the sense of community to a, to down to the ground level in this new and interesting way? And I think the other thing that's really interesting about this example is there's really two ways in which you can do this in terms of going beyond your comfort zone. You can go where your audience already is, or you can build something for them. And in this case, the bank has decided to get outside of its normal sort of like typical community sponsorship lane and design something that the whole community can enjoy, and that quite frankly is free for everyone to enjoy too, which also is really quite fabulous.
So to kind of add on to this, thinking about designing for maximum impact and thinking about using the tools that are at your disposal, I feel like all this really means is being intentional about all the details and just making sure that every element, big and small, ties back to your message in some way. And I think the more creative you can be, the more interesting ways you can find to tie things together, which is, I think, the best part of the creative process here. So thinking about layering all these different sensory elements like lighting, sound, even smell and taste to some regard. We've had events where they were very like nostalgia based, and we even offered like nostalgic snacks like Dunkaroos at like a 90s event. So like even small details like that really have like a huge lasting impact on folks. And I have some other examples on this slide, but thinking about like engaging people's emotions and providing personal connections, things like that, you have these different aspects that are like inspiring adults to play as if they were kids, because I think that's something that's just immediately relatable for everyone. And so looking at these installations, you can see that they didn't use a lot of materials, but the impact is like so fun and playful and sensory based that like you won't forget about this because you're not seeing this everywhere you go. So this one on the bottom with the basketball hoops is particularly inspiring to me because this was installed inside of a mall, but it's something that like you would not expect to see in a shopping mall, and it's something that everybody can play with, and it just like your brain is like, oh, that's not supposed to be there, but then you can't help your curiosity to want to go and like touch it and play with it. And so that's where we kind of start our process a lot of the times, is thinking of like, how can we put something here that doesn't make sense but then tie it back to our brand's messages, and people are like, wow, this is like very creative, I've never seen this before.
I love that.
So
So,
some that
oh,
is
go for it, Lena.
so the other thing that is important, is an important part of this, is knowing what not to do as well as knowing what to do. So when we start our process, we really try to have a foundation of research and really understand the communities that we're designing for and in, and making sure that things are accessible and putting respect for different cultures and different groups at the forefront, and trying our best not to alienate people, because that is not going to have the impact that you're hoping for. And it's actually a lot more simple and uncomplicated to involve people than you might think. I know it can be kind of overwhelming thinking of how to include all different types of people. Sometimes it can be daunting, but when you put thought into it and research into it, it really can be a simple process. And one of the ways that we love to do this at Milwaukee is always involving local businesses and community partners, especially folks in specific areas. So, like last summer, we did an event with Harley Davidson in South Milwaukee, and I feel like South Milwaukee doesn't get a lot of love. So, it was very exciting to engage a lot of local businesses there and really connect them with people who are visiting from out of town. And I think that's like a very genuine way to make this like inspiring event that is so much more personal and something that people are really going to remember as well. And another thing that we really focus on is sustainability, which I think if we're talking about like Gen Z and trends for Gen Z, that's a huge one. And so we do a lot of like reusable cups and reusable totes instead of like one-time use plastics and things like that, which are not that much more expensive to produce too. So again, just thinking of these small details and bringing people in is it's something to keep in mind because there's definitely some do's and don'ts for this type of thing.
Absolutely. The other thing that is sort of is a pitfall for me is I think when we think about having a lot of texture, and I 100% agree with you, I think going through even the five senses of an experience, I think is a really great way for this to be awe-inspiring, but to really be thinking about what's the concept clarity you want to have, right? Like, what is the message you want to connote in this experience, and how does it pass through every single element of it, from the way that the brand for the experience looks online, the messaging that people receive and in advance of the experience, how people are welcomed when they show up, what happens before, during that experience, and then after, having there be like a through line for that, I think is really important so that it doesn't feel random. I think a lot of times we see all these things and we think, oh, we need a lot of stuff. We're talking about adding a lot of stuff. And in some ways, I think it's easier to make things a little bit simpler. And I love this part about not overcomplicating it. I think one of my favorite parts about that event you noted, Lena, in South Milwaukee was it was actually in Grant Park, and we used a lot of the built-in infrastructure of the beach and the beach house there. And there was something so vibey about just kind of like leaning into that, day at the lake, that felt just perfect, like this wonderful welcome for all of the riders to come into town. And we literally heard people sort of gasp as they got off their bikes and say, oh, wow, I wasn't expecting this. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't anticipating what this actually might look like.
Mm.
I think the other thing to think about is really how are you going to measure the wow, right? So beyond attendance numbers and open rates, what are the ways in which you're going to like show return on your experience? And so a couple of things to think about and to consider evaluating so that the investment you make in spectacle is actually worth it. So there's sentiment analysis you can do on comments and posts. There's the quantity I'm sorry, to quantify the content that's shared post event. There's tracking the number of downloads or other platform-based engagement you're looking for. There's also real-time polling and asking questions, even just moving through the crowd and hearing from people like, how did you hear about this? What do you think about it? Some of that anecdotal real-time information can be really, really helpful. And then there's tools to monitor like connections made post. And obviously if there are if this is about a talent experience, so you're looking to sort of like have people join a talent community or even apply for a job, there are, harder, firmer KPIs that could come out from that. And there's obviously an analogy if you're trying to sell a product or service, building a customer community and actually seeing, how people actually interact and consume your brand in a more literal sense. The other thing I'll just note, and I said it at the top, was sometimes when you see these big installations and we talk about the grand spectacle of the events, we're thinking like events with thousands of people. But I actually think you can create a ton of wow in the smaller settings too. And when you're thinking about what that might be, to really think like it's okay. I noted someone in the chat said like, oh, we're struggling with RSVPs and people turning out. It's a whole new world as it relates to that. I think before the pandemic, we saw like maybe 50 to 70% of free event attendees actually turn up. Now it's closer to 30 to 50%. We just live in a world where the sense of needing to let people know that you're planning to come is no longer socially needed. There's no social pressure to do it. That said, if people do show up and it is a smaller quantity, how can you make sure that those that actually take the time to be there feel like a VIP? How is it that you can like potentially have, a sense of their names, what they're looking for, have more engaging, individualized attention and conversation that happens for them? And then finally here, I'll just note to just sort of circle back to the sustainability note that Lena laid out. You can also calculate things like your environmental impact by reducing rate, waste and carbon footprints. The other thing that I'm a huge proponent for in the sustainability bucket is do not print dates on any large scale signage. Is there a way in which if you would like something to be an annual experience that you can reuse those things so that we're not creating something for a one-time use and dumping it into local landfills?
Yeah, so above all, I think we'll just leave you with this note that if you do anything at all, you should go beyond the typical, which I think we've really driven home. Um, so voice your daring ideas and encourage your team to do the same. And I would say, like I put this in the chat earlier, but just operate from a place of curiosity instead of operating from a place of no. So instead of saying, no, that's too big, there's no way we can do that, we don't have the budget for that, really engage your senses and go through the process, do the research, watch some YouTube videos, go on Pinterest. That's what I love to do. Just ideate, get in a creative space and find some DIY articles and things like that, and really think about how you could make this happen, even on a smaller scale. I think you're still going to end up with something that's more awe-inspiring than if you would just say, no, that's not possible for us from the first place. And then like we were talking about before as well, pushing your boundaries and just doing your research. So when I think about, driving home your brand's core values, I like to research the trends in those sort of value areas and think of how can we do something that's traditional and expected from us, but capitalize on these new, innovations in this space to just inspire people that we can take something old and make it new again. And like I'd mentioned before as well, aim for detailed planning. So again, from like check-in to goodbye, like Angela was saying, like learning people's names and saying goodbye to them on like a one-on-one basis and like making the check-in more interesting and fun because that can be clunky sometimes. And something that's very important for us too when we start new planning is just looking at past events, whether it's ones that we've done or similar events that have gone on, and looking for areas of improvement and looking for ways that we can push those boundaries a little bit more. And the last thing that I'll leave you with is just to scale wisely. So you don't want to overwhelm people too much. They are probably familiar with your brand already and know what to expect. So you don't want to do too much too fast. You want to grow at a steady rate. And I would suggest just picking one or two important, impactful areas to kind of push and try something new in at a time with your events and installations and things. You don't want to give people too much at once because then that might confuse your message. So you just want to scale wisely.
For sure. I think I went to a conference earlier this fall, and one of the things that I took away from it was, and maybe it's a balancing to what you said about the audit. I think an audit is really important to see where we've been, but this one speaker said, stop trying to make it 2019, right? Like, I think a lot of us sort of felt like, oh, the world's back open. We can just sort of like dust off our old playbooks and, do what we've always done. And I think there is a balance between that audit, the need to grow in a like a wise way, and the opportunity we have to sort of create a new in this new world order we're all unfolding and navigating together. So I guess the last thing we'll leave you with is get off the dance floor, wildflowers. I hope that you guys took something out of this, enjoyed what we had to say. I'd love to have you ask questions if you have any. I can put, Toga already put my information. Toga has the information in the chat. Happy to connect and continue the conversation as well. But happy to take any questions. Otherwise, thank you all for joining us.